Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Hydrogen and Renewables, Drivers of Mediterranean Energy Market Integration Post-COVID. We are grateful to our moderator, Dr. Jonathan Walters, and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of this webinar to address your questions. And now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Jonathan Walters. Jonathan is truly an expert on MENA and the energy properties thereof. He is a former director in the World Bank's MENA department and has over 25 years of experience in the energy sector. Jonathan has worked on all countries of MENA, most of the countries of Asia, and many of the countries in the former Soviet Union and Africa. Jonathan, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Let me in turn briefly introduce our 3 expert speakers. We have Silvia Pariente David, who is also ex-World Bank and has been working in renewable energy in the Mediterranean for a long time. We have Bader Iken from Morocco, from the Renewable Energy Research Center in Morocco, and Frank Wouters, who lives in Abu Dhabi and is responsible for many things that probably explain himself, but he's been in renewables in the region for many years. The context of this, I guess, is that there's renewed interest in using clean energy as a driver of economic change and economic growth and employment in the Mediterranean region. I think it's long been recognized, both sides of the Mediterranean, that prosperity of one side depends on the prosperity of the other side, and that the North African side of the Mediterranean has a fantastic resource in renewable energy and available land and so on, and can provide clean energy to satisfy some of the clean energy demands of the European side of the Mediterranean. And many of us were involved, and many of us are aware of the previous attempts, some of the previous attempts to get that kind of integration across the Mediterranean for energy, to allow the North African side to utilize its fantastic resource for the benefit of both sides of the Mediterranean. Not all of those attempts in the past have led to enormous success, but now maybe we have a different situation, different because renewables are now a lot cheaper than they used to be, different because I think both sides of the Mediterranean in the last few years have seen the, let's say, the social and political costs of not integrating, not trading that much, not creating employment both sides of the Mediterranean. And also very different in the sense that the European Union has a strongly renewed interest in green energy development. The Green Deal is now a very big thing on the European side. It's merged now with the need to have economic stimulus because of the crisis, the economic crisis following the COVID-19 pandemic. It looks like the, let's say the stars are aligned. The circumstances are now more favorable than perhaps they used to be. But let me stop there and ask each of our speakers to tell us more about all that, starting with Sylvia Pariente. Sylvia, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to share my screen and see if it works. Okay, everybody can see it. Now 15 minutes. Yeah, and I guess Jonathan did a lot already at explaining why we have together on the title of this webinar some words that may not seem to fit together, but the title says COVID. So let me start by saying a few words about that. And I just would like to show you just two graphs, which I think are very, in French we say eloquent. Anyways, they come from the IEA, both of them. And the first one shows the change in energy demand in 2020. So it's an estimate, even a forecast for total energy demand and by fuel. And I guess what you can see is that the fossil fuels are hit a lot more than renewables. Partly is because the transport sector is the one that was hit the most by the recession when people were locked in, but also because in the power sector as well, the fossil fuels feel the brunt of the demand more than renewables because they have a higher variable cost than the renewables. So as a result of that, we've seen a share of renewables in the power generation at levels never seen before. To give you an example, in Europe on the 11th of May, I think it was an average of 54%. We had a higher level in some countries like Denmark, even Germany at some point. And it's quite routine now to operate a power system with share of 70% of renewables or more, which previously was thought impossible. So we are able to do things that we were thinking were impossible. In French, we say l'impossible n'est pas français. So we are, with COVID, we're doing the impossible. It's not just the share of renewable which is going up, because the addition of new capacity keeps going, even though there were some issues in the supply chain with the problems in Asia. So we may be witnessing the beginning of the end of fossil fuels, and particularly clean coal, which is one of Jonathan's favorite topics right now. So maybe we get back to it. The second graph is to show you the change, and I don't know if you see it because I think it's hidden by the little things there on the right, but it's the change in annual CO2 emissions. And what it says is that it's an estimate again for 2020, it will fall by 8%, something like nearly 3 gigaton. And that's something that has never happened before, even during the war or the Great Depression. And well, that's something quite amazing. And if we could replicate something like that, then we could think that the Paris Agreement is within reach and we could get to the 1.5 degrees. But with the IEA calculation, we will need 10 years like that. So the big question that I've put on the right, if you see it, is what can we do to prevent a rebound when the economies recover? I mean, we may not be able to prevent completely a rebound, but some of that. So the IEA has prepared a sustainable recovery plan with a menu of action that could be taken by different countries to revive the economies, boost employment, while making the energy system clean and resilient. And if many countries adopt many of their recommendations, then 2019 could be the definitive peak in global emission. That takes a lot of hope. Now, the European Union is at the forefront of all those green recovery efforts, is considered the role model in terms of developing green stimulus packages. And they announced on the 27th of May, a big recovery program, Repair and Prepare, of 1.85 trillion, and shouldn't forget many zeros, euro. It is centered on the EU Green Deal. So it's really putting the green transition at the center of this recovery package. And it advocates an integrated approach between the climate and the economy that needs emergency support. This Green Deal aims at making Europe the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. So in the meantime, they're preparing a climate law with interim targets for 2030. When the Green Deal came out in December, well, we talked about 50 or 55% reduction, but bigger numbers are being put on the table now. And there is currently a consultation on that. Now, as far as today, because I'm not going to go through all the pieces, you can see a very nice graph here that was put together by the European Commission. And you can see this is a little bit of everything in it that put in. They call it a bit the Marshall Plan for the recovery. But as far as we're concerned today, I think there are two important things in the Green Deal, that it goes beyond Europe, and it goes beyond energy. What you basically in every document, you'll see always a mention of cooperation with third countries, but especially with the southern neighborhood. So the countries we are talking about today. And beyond energy, because as part, at the same time as the Green Deal, there was a communication from the Commission for an industrial strategy for innovation, for new technologies, and it's aiming to make Europe a leader in low carbon technologies. And actually the Hydrogen Alliance is already mentioned in that communication. It's also supposed to ensure that Europe remains competitive to avoid carbon leakages. So the possibility of doing carbon, border carbon adjustment is also mentioned. So that covers pretty much everything. I'm not going to go in all the detail of the recovery plan because that will take more than just the webinar, more than my presentation. I've put a few slides in annex. If you get the slides afterwards, I give more detail. But the important thing to remember here is that there are two pillars, the new instrument, which is the Next Generation EU, and the other one is what's called the MFF, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework. And the important aspect is that this is channel, it's working through the countries. Basically, it's linking the support to the member states, giving them green strings, and a lot of that goes through the national energy and climate plans. So that's the way, and also what's called the semester process of the European Union. The other important aspect, which I already alluded to, is that they will be out of that amount. Maybe it seems small compared to the big number, but still a lot of money, 87 billion euro for the external action. And the Western Balkans, by the way, get mentioned very frequently. A green agenda, green transition, and that's also part of the Mediterranean. Now, to reach carbon neutrality, you need to use forms of energy which have no carbon. So basically, it requires a massive scale-up of renewable energy, and it requires electrification because very few forms of renewable can be used directly in an end use. There are some of them like water heating, but most of the time you need to go through electricity. So here I've put on the chart some graphs that come from a study by Solar Power Europe and the University in Finland, LUT, I don't remember what the L stands for, but I've put in annex other sources and other data, and they give pretty much the same result that you need to have your share of electricity, which you have in the graph at the upper right-hand corner, go to, some people say 70, 80, 90%, a lot. And it's direct and indirect electrification because some sectors, and we'll hear more, I'm sure, from Frank and Brad, are difficult to electrify, and that's why you need hydrogen. Renewable alone won't do it, you need hydrogen, and that's what's called indirect electrification. And in all of that, COVID is helping a little bit because our economies are increasingly becoming digital. We work from home and we use more electricity. We use less oil because we don't drive our car unless we have an electric car. And interestingly enough, actually, one of the webinars, because we spend our time going to webinars, we got addicted to that. And I heard somebody say it's very bad for energy efficiency because all these interconnection, network services, blah, 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 big data consume a lot of energy. So maybe we'll have to close the loop here and see if it's good or bad in the end anyway. Now, why would we care when we talk about the Mediterranean? That's our subject today. And what? Well, it's because if you want to use a lot of renewables, you need power systems to be flexible. And one way to increase the flexibility of power systems, there are several ways, but two key solutions are storage and regional market integration through interconnectors. In a way, if you want, storage addresses the time dimension of flexibility, and the regional integration is the spatial dimension, because if you integrate markets that have different, that are located in different locations, the probability there is no wind is lower. If you integrate east to west, you always have sun someplace, and basically it's the law of large number. The more, actually, it's always easier to balance in real time a big electricity market than a small one. People don't realize, but that's a very basic given. Now, by the way, the value of regional integration in the end depends on the cost of storage and vice versa. I saw an interesting graphic in one of the webinars again that shows that the economics of storage were much better in the UK than in France and Germany, because UK is not as interconnected as France and Germany. So it's not, you don't have a single solution always, because people say, oh, what is the best? Depends. It depends. The answer is always it depends. However, if we do it around the Mediterranean, not only we get a more flexible power system, but we give Europe access to huge potential in renewable. Remember the little squares that Desert Tech used to put and say, with just a little bit of the Sahara Desert, you serve the world. So let's do it together. And the legislative package that is to be the way to implement the policy in Europe includes many cooperation mechanisms. It has to change now with the Green Deal and the EU recovery plan, but the basics are in there. As I said earlier, renewables are not enough. You need hydrogen. And here again, the Mediterranean will help. You have two graphs here. The one on the top on the left is a world map of the world also from the IEA showing hydrogen costs. So it's funny the ways they do it, but the cheapest is the red, the darker red. And I had another such map which was all blue. So you can see the cheapest area to produce hydrogen from renewable, green hydrogen, is the North Africa, and then you go towards Asia, and the top there you have Iceland. And the graph on the lower right-hand corner is one I took from one of your webinars. I think Frank was presented by somebody from the Federal Ministry in Germany when they announced their new hydrogen strategy, which is 9 billion euro, of which 2 will be done with other countries, mostly Morocco. I think we'll hear more. But what's interesting here, to make it attractive to supply Germany, you need to be at the upper hand, right-hand corner. And what you have there is Norway, and Norway is not just blue. It's also, it can be green because it has a lot of renewable, and it can be blue, gray, of course. And I was on another webinar with Sintef in Norway, and they're very, very sure that they're going to be the main provider of hydrogen to the world. Then we have to see what Morocco says. We have Morocco, we have Tunisia, and we have also Iceland. Algeria could easily move in there because the vertical axis is the stability of the country. But it's very important, and Germany saw it. It has allocated more than 20% of its budget to working with partners. And it was again mentioned by the EU commissioner that what they call clean energy partnership, that's going to be the backbone of cooperation. Okay, well, I told you the story, so how do we make it happen? Basically, that's the question. It's obvious, the economics are obvious, it's obvious we want to do it, so what is preventing us? To make it happen, we need the hardware. We need the backbones, the interconnectors. At the top, you have the map of the electricity infrastructure in the Mediterranean, and you can see it's connected on the west and the east, and it's empty in the middle. And we have many projects, some of them have not moved for 10 years. If I look at the gas infrastructure, there it's much better interconnected, including in the middle, and all the pipelines are empty. Not completely, I'm not exaggerating. The one from Algeria to Spain, med gas is empty, merely. We never know why it was built. Whatever is Pedro pipeline that goes through Morocco is not at full utilization, and the ones for Tunisia is there. So what I'm saying is that it's not enough to have the interconnector. First, you should build them only when you're sure you need them, because they're very expensive. But we have targets in Europe talking about extending those targets. I'm not sure it's the solution. If you want to have your infrastructure used, you need to make sure that the national markets can talk together. That's what you hear all the time now about interoperability. You need some convergence in regulation. You need to be able to do exchanges easily. You need the transmission system operator to work together. You need a lot of things. And I'm not going to list them all. Medrec does a good job. So basically, to make it simple, it's not enough to have the musician and the instruments. You need the musical score and you need the conductor. So they need to be able to play together, otherwise it is useless. And I think this is a very good opportunity to try to make it happen, actually, because we're going to need that infrastructure. So I think the full conclusion should be delayed until we have heard from all the speakers at the end of the session. But a couple of points I would like to make, however, is that COVID is of course bad, but it may be brings some good in terms of doing big projects. It's a disruptive trend. It's like a shock therapy, and a shock therapy usually brings something different, creativity, but it's also triggering protectionism. We have seen it. So here I'm talking about working together, so we make big things happen. And it's a bit difficult when people say, oh, we're going to buy local, and I don't want supply chain disruption and all that. The other thing I will say is that the future is very uncertain, as always. And when you talk about renewables, not only you have uncertainty of the future, but you don't know when you have your resource, what we call the intermittency. But it will certainly be complex. Why is complex? Because we're working at several levels. I was on another webinar, the only word was communities. Everybody thinks it has to be decentralized. Every citizen has the right to produce. And they hate it, the network operator. They don't want that. I mean, it's even more complexity for them to deal with multiple points of generation. So we're talking about making it decentralized, but better coordinated with the neighbors. So we're introducing several levels, local, national, supranational, and we have to make all of that work together. That reminds me of the days when we had the multi-level hierarchical planning with my dear friend Alan Mann. A couple of things I'm sure of is that in its recovery plan and the Green Deal, Europe will be better off doing it with the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean will also benefit from that. Europe cannot do it alone, and the Mediterranean will get jobs, will get a lot of things, and especially with hydrogen, because now we seem to be entering the era of hydrogen. We had wood, we had coal, we had oil, we had gas, renewable, and I think very soon we're going to be in the hydrogen area. And I think we can discuss that further afterwards. Thank you for your attention. And I just have to stop it.
Great, thank you very much, Sylvia. There's a very interesting presentation. I noted for Bader's sake as the next speaker that you made a challenge to Morocco, said, you know, Norway thinks it's going to be the big green hydrogen producer, and what does Morocco have to say? So in a moment, we'll ask Bader what Morocco has.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you, Sylvia, for the presentation, and it would be then it was the right introduction for our contribution, and I would like as well then to share with you what we are doing now in Morocco regarding green hydrogen, regarding Power to X. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, first of all, I would like to start with one very old slide. This is a slide from the Desertec colleagues. This is a slide which is 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, we tried to start as well to connect different countries in the Mediterranean region, and as well as to try to export the green electricity. And then at that time, we noticed that we have definitely a huge potential. And slowly, you see on the right side, on the top, there is some projections, perspectives regarding the needs for Europe. And we are able then to say clearly that through different types of renewable energies, we're able then to cover this need. And what would be now the difference between 10 years ago, the Desertec initiative, and then slowly, the current discussion about then the hydrogen strategy and Power to X? I think we are, and we know that we have enough resources in this region, and this is what as well Sylvia introduced. But the other point is the fact that in the last 5 years, we saw a real decrease of the costs of the levelized electricity. We know, and all the studies are speaking about the limit to be able to produce hydrogen through the use of renewable energy, and we're speaking about then $2 per kilowatt hour. This might allow to produce hydrogen and other derivatives of hydrogen, which will be equivalent to different power fuels which are produced by based on fossil fuels. And slowly we see that in the last tenders and in the last bidding processes, we are reaching the target. Of course, there is another important factor. This is related to load factor, to be able to produce then during a day, maybe then during 24 hours per day, green electricity. And this is why it's very important then to mix and then to have as well the right hybridization between different renewable energy sources. And why we think that Morocco has a huge potential in this regard. First of all, I spoke about then the high renewable energy potential. And we have an advantage when I spoke about then the load factor, because we have regions in which we will or we might find then a very high irradiation, solar irradiation, but on the same time, we have as well then a very high wind speed. And this means that this mix might be very important, because we have some regions in Morocco with a load factor up to 70%. And when we will mix it with solar energy, we might be then able to produce during then 24 hours green electricity using renewables. On the other hand, we were able, and I'm very happy to be here with Jonathan, with Sylvia, because they were involved in this very positive and amazing project, the Moroccan Solar Plan. And we were able to develop a big power plants, which are using thermal solar energy, concentrated solar power. We had in the last 10 years, we developed R&D and capacity building regarding this topic, because when we speak about the production of green hydrogen, of Power to X, it will start as well with renewables. We are trying to develop a joint strategy as well with the private sector. We're not only doing this with the public sector, we have a strong political support, and then we saw in the last week the alliance between Germany and Morocco regarding the development of an integrated market for power to X and to start then a very important first projects. And I will then tell you more about this topic. Last but not least, Sylvia spoke as well about the need to have an integrated development. And this is very good because we have as well existing infrastructures regarding electricity, regarding gas, and this is very important. Maybe then one issue regarding Desertec when we started 10 years ago, when we had all the dynamic with Desertec, all the time we spoke about then only electricity. And we had the feeling that we had enemies, all the people coming from the oil industry, gas industry. Now, this is, I will say, an advantage because we are speaking about as well sun and wind in gas bottles. We will be able then to work with all the different partners. Morocco was identified in one important study of the World Energy Council of 2018 as one of the 6 countries with a very high potential to export power fuels. And Morocco was identified as a front runner, and I told you as well then why. One of the reasons is as well then the mix between solar energy and wind energy. We had then another study which as well identified Morocco as a country which might be able to capture up or between 4 and 8% of the global power to X market. And this will mean a huge amount of investments, but as well then huge amounts regarding this business. We're speaking about between 100 up to 400 billions of euros. I have to say that Jonathan and Sylvia, as the former senior managers of the World Bank, those are numbers which are normal for them. But I have to say, as a scientist and researcher, this is an amazing potential when we spoke about then hundreds of billions of euros, of hundreds of billions of dollars. I wanted as well then to share with you some important steps and milestones which we conducted in the last years. I am a member of the National Commission of Power to X in Morocco. And when we started with a study regarding technologies to know more about the maturity of the technologies regarding the production of hydrogen. We conducted as well a study to identify the potential and opportunities of power to X for Morocco. And then last year, our energy minister decided then to set up the National Commission for Power to X. And we are now finalizing the roadmap for Power to X for Morocco. And as I said then before, we had this very important signing ceremony and alliance between Morocco and Germany. And maybe those are first results to give you another view about then this strategy, which would be then we're still in the final phases, and then we will, our energy minister will then tell more and introduce then this strategy in a few weeks or maybe then in a few months. But what we identified already, it will start in Morocco, and the Power to X strategy will start with hydrogen as an industry feedstock, and especially then for ammonia. Why? Because we are already importing more than 2 million tons of ammonia every year for the fertilizer industry. And this will be then for the short term, as well the export it as well possible. And then we are thinking not only to export then hydrogen as hydrogen, but to be able to export as well derivatives of hydrogen like ammonia. For the midterm, it would be, or there is a potential regarding the storage of hydrogen for stabilizing then the grid, to use it as well for heavy trucks, good transport, public transport, and on the long term, passenger vehicles, industrial heat, as well as the other transportation sectors, railway, maritime, as well as aviation. And when you see for Morocco, we will start, I think, of course, to use our renewable energy potential to produce then hydrogen, to produce as well then ammonia. With this hydrogen, we are able as well then to store it. And then on the second stage, we would be then able to produce, to add the carbon from from other industries to be able to decarbonize as well other sectors, and we will be able to add the carbon with hydrogen to produce power fuels and to produce as well synthetic gases. Regarding R&D, IRISEN is the National Institute for Renewable Energy. We are developing R&D, applied R&D research platforms, and those are living labs. We have in our platforms a lot of pilot projects, and now we are developing one R&D platform for Power-to-X for the hydrogen topic called the Green H2A, Hydrogen and Applications. And in this regard, of course, we started then a few years ago to work on small R&D projects, and in these topics or projects, we had then a test range between 1 kilowatt and 50 kilowatt to produce then the first kilograms of green molecules. Regarding the research platform Green H2A, we will have pilot projects, and I will then tell you more in the next slides. In the last slide, we will develop pilot projects with a scale of some megawatts. And now as well with Germany, with our partners, local partners, we will develop then a reference project, and we will speak then more or have a capacity of 100 megawatts. And we are speaking about some tons of green molecules. It's important as well to tell you that regarding the strategy, we see regarding the potential for 2030, for 2040, 2050, we're speaking about for 2030 about 20 gigawatts, for 2040 about 60 gigawatts, for 2050 more than 100 gigawatt. And then at this moment, it means some millions from tons of green molecules. And in our research platform, we will focus on the production of green hydrogen, green ammonia as a very important topic for our fertilizer industry, green methanol, adding carbon, but as well as to produce liquid fuels like synthetic kerosene, synthetic diesel. And we are as well working not only on the national level. We are starting now with our international partners, with Germany, to work on the different parts of the value chain regarding the development of an ecosystem for green molecules. We're working on the topic of the hybridization of renewable energy, the production of hydrogen, the transport of hydrogen, and the storage of hydrogen. Then as well, green industry, green chemistry. This is very important because we're not able at the beginning to export maybe hydrogen. We have to transform this hydrogen in different other molecules and derivatives to be able to transport it. Carbon capture, storage, and applications, as well as the application regarding mobility for the different sectors. And this is a little bit then the target, or maybe I will say the dream. We think that this will allow us and give us an opportunity to build a larger union and international partnership, regional energy partnership between Europe and Africa based on the Mediterranean region. And this is very important because we will then start as well to be able to develop local content, and this is as well very important for us. We will be able to reach these targets, to decarbonize different parts of the society, and we are able then to do this then jointly. This is then my last slide. We hope to contribute to provide clean energy to our planet. And last but not least, if you allow me, I hope then till December that we will have the opportunity to meet physically in Marrakesh, because we are planning to organize the World PTX Summit. And till there, if it would be not possible, then we will organize it like this now, like a webinar. But I hope we will have the opportunity to meet them physically and then to help to boost this very important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Badr. You're seriously trying to tempt us all to Marrakesh. I would love to be in Marrakesh in December for sure. Thank you for a presentation that outlined the vision from Morocco and what you're actually doing to kind of realize that vision. Before I turn to Frank, let me draw everybody's attention to the Q&A box. We've had quite a few questions come in, but there's definitely space for more questions. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, please put it into the Q&A box. I'd also like to point out that apparently we have a record level of participation in this webinar compared to other webinars organized by the International Association for Energy Economics. We have almost 200 people on the webinar. This is obviously a topic of great interest. Frank, let me turn over to you to tell us the story from your perspective.
Thanks, Jonathan. Can you see my screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Fantastic. So we've seen the big picture. We've heard Sylvia mention the European perspective and how hydrogen has a place in the European Green Deal. We've heard from Badr on Morocco and how there could be an interaction. And I would like to focus on some of the potential practical issues that are involved in getting molecules across borders. But let's first take a step back and look at where hydrogen sits. And this is an interesting graph that shows how hydrogen is really in the elevator. I mean, the number of basically declared projects, the overall pipeline in October last year was about 3.2 gigawatts in the world, and in just a few months that almost tripled to 8.2. And this was March this year. I'm pretty sure that even despite COVID, that has gone up much further. And it's also interesting to note that 57% of those projects are in Europe, so it's definitely a hotspot. And last week, as Sylvia already mentioned, a leaked draft version of the European Hydrogen Strategy could be found online, and that will be officially communicated on the 8th of July, so we're looking forward to that. But if you look at what's in that leaked document, I was very pleased to see that 40 gigawatts, the target by 2030 was actually adopted from a document that we all worked on. So we basically came together as industry and said we need 40 gigawatts by 2030, plus an additional 40 gigawatts in neighboring countries, and that is specifically North Africa and the Ukraine. And in the short term, Europe wants to have 4 gigawatts by 2024. And there is a specific mention of import for neighboring countries. There is obviously also a budgetary definition, 13 to 15 billion euro in electrolysis, but also you need the power, so 50 to 150 billion euro for dedicated wind and solar projects to basically power the electrolyzers. So these are big numbers. Where does the money come from? I think Sylvia already mentioned the Next Generation EU fund, 750 billion. So part of that is economic stimulus, and a large part of that will go towards these hydrogen initiatives. How much exactly, what kind of funds for what exactly will be detailed in the next coming months, but it will be substantial, and you can't get this done without money. So, I think that's homework for the Commission in the months to come. Now, let's look at some of the more down-to-earth topics, infrastructure. one of the one of the party lines for hydrogen is that we have a massive gas grid in Europe that basically connects all the countries and regions, and we're going to build new capacity offshore wind in the north of Europe, and there is potential for cost competitive solar energy in the south of Europe, and we can use the gas grid. Can you actually use the gas grid? Because there is some concerns, certain materials can become brittle, and the question is also, can you use compressors, flow meters, etc. Now there's some mounting body of evidence through research done in France, Germany, and the Netherlands, that the bulk of the pipelines, and this is both the transmission pipes, the big ones, the medium pressure pipes, and then the large volume of the distribution pipes, there is very little issues with materials, both the pipe itself as well as the flanges, the gaskets, the valves, and all of the stuff. It seems that most of that can actually be used, converted with minor cost to accommodate hydrogen. I have to disclaim that a little bit, but I'll tell you about that in a following slide. So the idea is to start working on dedicated hydrogen pipes for 100% immediately, but also work on a transition system to gradually convert the existing gas pipes if we want to convert from natural gas to hydrogen in the future. Now, blending. You can blend hydrogen, mix it with natural gas, because that's what we already have, or you can have pure hydrogen, and there is a bit of a debate ongoing about what we should do. Now, again, there is, mounting evidence that up to 6% volume percent, we do not need to invest much. Now, we do have to realize that hydrogen is different gas than natural gas. It has a much lower density. It's about 1/3 in terms of density, and in that sense, it does change the gas quality. Also, because of that, you need, after a certain point, you do need different compressors and flow meters and all of that. And at the end consumer end also, I mean, since you're changing the gas quality, it does have repercussions. For example, compressed natural gas tanks are only certified for 2% hydrogen. So if we do 6%, which is possible, you do have an issue there. You need to get the hydrogen out. 6% on the transmission system level is possible. Another piece of evidence shows that injecting hydrogen, so blending hydrogen in the distribution grid, especially if you link it directly to renewable energy, you have not just a different gas percentage, but it's also variable. And that is a big problem because there's been some work done in, I believe it was for Germany, where they've looked at the distribution grid. So the largest grid where you actually take it from, for example, for your house. If you would then add an electrolyzer that runs on solar or on wind, there is points in time where you have 100% already. And that is not something that specifically is compatible with how we use gas. Also, we have to realize that in the future, the largest demand will be for pure hydrogen. That will not be any longer for natural gas or for blends. So we do need to think about how to get to that end goal of having 100% hydrogen. So the idea is that you start with blending on the transmission grid up to 6%. That you can do and you can manage. You have to start building a dedicated hydrogen grid immediately, because without transmission you can't have anything, and also work on a transition system where we convert existing natural gas pipes to hydrogen. So the colors of hydrogen, Sylvia already mentioned it. We have black, gray, brown, green, blue hydrogen, and all have different meanings. First of all, it's not defined. And secondly, they even within a category, for example, blue hydrogen, the common understanding is that is fossil-made hydrogen, typically in a steam methane reforming process. So you take natural gas, you steam methane reform it, and then you capture the CO2 and you store the CO2 or you use it. Now there is various technologies for that, and the amount of CO2 that you're able to capture varies from, let's say, 50% to 90%. So that needs to be defined. And the solution for that is that we should really focus on the carbon content. So we need to develop a unified and universally accepted system of life cycle carbon accounting that is also valid across borders, because Europe will have a border carbon adjustment mechanism. And one of the solutions, and this is something that people have been working on for quite a while now, is a system of guarantees of origin, plus additional sustainability criteria, which are specifically relevant for biomass, because you want to know where that is from and how that works. And the starting point would be certify, and I believe Morocco has already signed a memorandum of understanding to also look at certify the methodology within that to be compatible with what Europe is doing. Now, we've talked about import, and this is a fundamental issue, like why is Europe looking at importing hydrogen? At the moment, Europe imports more than 50% of primary energy. And if you're converting your system to run largely on solar and wind, some biomass and hydropower, but if it's decarbonized, it has to be that for the bulk. Why do you need to import? Because you can do that yourself. Now, the issue is that electricity right now is 20% of final energy. If we're going to 50% electricity, which is a massive expansion of the electricity footprint, we already need 2,000 gigawatts of solar and 650 gigawatts of wind. A large part of that is offshore. Now, if you then want to cover the bulk of the remaining 50% of energy, because you don't want to burn any more fossil fuels, but you want clean hydrogen, you would need to at least double that. So you would need another 2,000 gigawatts of solar and another 650 gigawatts of wind. And then you're looking at the map, you see the population density of the continent, there's just not enough space. And then comes the little, the little desert tech box that says that 8% of the Sahara Desert has enough solar energy to supply the entire planet. So you're looking at how can we organize. So North Africa could potentially, and we've heard that, produce hydrogen competitively and export that to Europe. Also considering that gas pipes are very cost-effective ways of getting bulk energy over longer distances. And that's basically the bottom line. That's why, we're talking about this today. Now, how does that work? What kind of market design are we looking at? And this is a very simplistic view of that, but it gives you a flavor. So right now we have a gas system whereby you have gas production and imports. So natural gas in Europe comes from, largely Norway, from the Netherlands and Russia and Algeria, and more LNG. We have pharmaceutical amounts of biogas that are also injected into the natural gas system because it's compatible. And then on the offtake side, you have industrial use and you have built environment for heating and all of those things. In between, there's also storage. But let's say half of the gas in Europe is locked in long-term contracts, and the other half is traded on gas markets, and there's various marketplaces. For example, the European Energy Exchange does that. Now, if we're then going to introduce hydrogen, as I already said, and then this is where it gets complex. It's a horrible slide, but we're going to make green hydrogen, and we're going to partly blend that into the natural gas grid, as I explained, but there will be also dedicated converted natural gas pipes that have 100% hydrogen, or new pipes that will do the same. You can still also make hydrogen from biogas, and you'll have electrolyzers, and all of that goes either in the mix to industry built environment, but also for transport. We will be able to have hydrogen in the filling station. Now, where I think we can do some innovation is to create a hydrogen clearing pool. And part of the idea behind that is, and this is something we're working on right now, is that the hydrogen surcharge, so the difference between the higher cost for hydrogen in the beginning and natural gas, will be all transferred to a hydrogen clearing pool and spread out over all gas customers. So the transmission system operator or somebody like that will be in charge of that. So there will be a fixed feed-in tariff, much like the German feed-in tariff system that has worked very well for 17 years, from 2000 to 2017. And that is spread out over all customers. And then you don't have a tax and spend system to basically finance that subsidy. But that is something to be considered and discussed. And then lastly, Brave New World in 2050, we've gotten rid of fossil fuels and we're all green. And we can produce green electricity and green hydrogen, biogas, hydrogen, and take it to customers. And by that time, I can guarantee you it will be cheaper than what we have right now. And I think with that, I'm done.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. 3 great presentations. Thank you to our speakers. Let me take a couple of questions in the couple of minutes remaining to us. I see in the Q&A box that Bader has indicated a couple of questions he would like to answer live. One was a question about the timeline of projects in Morocco. And the other was a question about how will countries, Morocco and others perhaps, strengthen their institutions or use their institutions to ensure that exports of green hydrogen or green ammonia don't cause some kind of resource curse in the country, and that are actually a benefit to the people of the country. So, but in the couple of minutes that we have left, if you can actually answer that resource curse question in a couple of minutes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try then to be fast. First of all, regarding then the timeline for the different projects, we will now, we started already now since 1 year to prepare the R&D platform with the different pilot projects for green hydrogen, green ammonia, green methanol, and so on. And we will start by the construction of the research platform next year. And I will say 2021 to start really with the R&D infrastructures. Regarding the big pilot project or the reference projects, I will say maybe the target would be, of course, it's starting with studies, I will say 2024. But of course, then we will, it will be then more precise after finishing then the studies. Regarding the second question, of course, this is very important, but I have then to tell you that, as I said at the beginning, we are trying and we are developing now the current strategy involving the public sector as well as the private sector. This is when we started with the Moroccan Solar Plan, we didn't start it from the scratch to have as well the involvement of the private sector. The advantage of this topic, as I said before, we know that for the short and mid-term, we have to have the transformation industry. It means we will have, because we have to produce, for example, an ammonia to be able to export ammonia, we will have the opportunity to build local industries. This is very important. And this is why we will start with capacity building. We will start to develop an ecosystem to work on all the different parts of the value chain. This is one issue. Second, on the other hand, it's very important as well then to mention that when we will develop a lot of renewable energy power plants, when we will develop as well to desalinate water, we will have for our industries, the opportunity and the access to a competitive energy. And this is as well very important for the industrial sector. Last but not least, if we would like to decarbonize our societies and all the different sectors, we need to fund this energy transition. And I think that through such kind of cooperation, not only in Morocco, in North Africa and as well in Africa, this is an opportunity to have then enough funding to be able as well to start slowly to decarbonize then the sector. We hope, and of course, this is a clear target, not only what we will produce to be exported, but the idea, of course, is then to address the local need to decarbonize society, the different sectors, as well as the export. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm afraid, I mean, there are more questions in the Q&A box, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. So let me thank our three speakers.
I think we can have a few more questions, Jonathan. I'm not sure that you saw the private message to you because it was sent to me.
Sorry about that.
Oh.
Sorry about that, Jonathan. And I sent it to Frank. This is David Williams from IAEE. If you wish to entertain a few more questions, we can extend,
let's do that.
extend a little bit longer.
Okay, great. So I see there's a number of questions that Sylvia has indicated in the Q&A box that she would like to answer. Sylvia, why don't you just go ahead and answer the ones that you
Okay, you may have to remind. I think there was one on nuclear, which I've answered. Unless I miss that. Well, the answer is yes, nuclear has no carbon, but convincing anti-nuclear people is like convincing in the US a Republican to become Democrat or vice versa. You know, basically, you don't discuss nuclear. It's more like politics. I used to be a modeler of nuclear reactor, but I can ascertain that it is without carbon and it should be considered a solution. And the French always say that. Anyway, there was a second question, which I think I answered on the name of the pipeline that goes through Morocco. And in French is le gazoduc Maghreb Europe, and in English, Maghreb Europe gas pipeline, I think. I always get it wrong. So
okay, what about the question, have MENA authorities already discussed cooperation and regional market opportunities? I don't know, when I say regional market, I don't know which region necessarily, but please answer the question.
Just let me finish on the pipeline. Somebody asked if there was the East Med pipeline, and I've not mentioned. I mentioned the other pipeline I mentioned was Transmed. And my understanding, each one of them is partially a stranded asset. Some people say the gas should stay in the ground. If you don't use them for hydrogen, then there will be even more stranded assets. Now, I'm not an expert, and Frank discussed that a lot on the blending, because it's clear, it's been proven that you can put a certain amount of hydrogen. But the other hand, you don't get the same pure hydrogen. So it's all going to depend what you want to do with what you get on the other side. And the technical experts are better. But I think some decision will have to be taken, maybe not right now, on how to transport that hydrogen. I understand there are many different ways of doing it. Now, the discussion on MENA, I think it depends what you define MENA. It's a little bit complicated when you talk about the Mediterranean, because it overlaps several jurisdictions and you never know which one is the entity. To talk in the name of the Mediterranean, normally, my understanding, the most official is the Union for the Mediterranean, but is active with the European Commission and the European Union to try to build various things. And they've set up two institutions which I think are very useful, is MEDREG and MEDSO. MEDSO is the equivalent of ENSOE for the Mediterranean, and they're very, very important. And the ENSOG for the gas, they will have a key role to play, number one, of integration of renewables, and number two, of interoperability and building in putting in the hydrogen. You're going to need the proper network code and everything. And MEDREG is could be the equivalent of ACER, because you're going to need a bunch of regulation to make all of that work together. So I think there are a couple of entities. Maybe they need to be given more authority to be representing some of the countries. And it could start by, like the way Europe started, it didn't start immediately with 27. You start by little pieces. And maybe initially what's important is to have Maghreb working with the EU, because we saw that many of the sources of the renewables are hydrogen, and it's already interconnected both on gas and electricity. So you can start with a smaller entity, and there we have Yuma and the Comelec as two entities you can talk to. I'm sure we could talk about the subject for a long time. I can turn over to Frank, who has plenty of questions to answer.
Frank, yeah, Frank has indicated he wants to tell us about explosions with hydrogen.
Yeah, so there was another question also whether it's dangerous in the house. Well, I think there's a few things to consider. First of all, we had town gas in much of Europe before we had natural gas, and town gas is already 50 to 60% hydrogen. So in that sense, I don't think more houses blew up in the 60s than they also do now with natural gas. I mean, it is an explosive gas, so you have to be careful. But there's been quite a number of studies done on that. And, you know, there was a study done by Kiwa in the Netherlands on the distribution grid. It is, you know, as a gas, it has a different characteristic. So it's not any more unsafe than, for example, natural gas, but you do need to, you know, look out for different things than with natural gas. For example, if you dig up a natural gas pipe with, you know, an excavator, then there is a certain risk profile, and that is different with hydrogen. So in terms of how to do these things, it's how you instruct people to work around these kinds of technologies. So the bottom line is it's not any unsafer than natural gas, but obviously, you know, you have to be careful, but you have to be careful with many things.
Okay. Thank you. So I also see a question that I think any of you might choose to answer, which is how European support schemes could benefit Morocco.
I just responded that. So I guess I don't know if it's not clear or if you want me to add, but my understanding, the EU recovery packages has various support schemes to promote green stimulus packages in EU country. But each time they say some of that may apply to certain country, especially the neighborhood. That's why I was mentioning it in the slide, that 85 billion euro, number one. Number two, currently on the CE for all package, there is already a lot of cooperation mechanism. They will apply to renewables, and I don't see why they wouldn't apply to hydrogen. Now you need some adjustment. I think Frank did mention, and that's something I keep saying, you need to certify what this hydrogen is. Whatever you do, you need to certify. It's the same issue, as you know, with Morocco. We worked on the set roadmap, exchanging electricity between Morocco and 4 European countries, going through Spain. You need to certify to the European that what they're receiving has no carbon, especially if they're thinking of doing border carbon adjustment, then they need to know what to apply it. So Europe has a system of guarantee of origin. We can, of course, invent another one, and there are IREX and stuff like that. But it seems to me somebody who wants to trade with Europe and be able to speak the same language should try to adopt a system which is compatible. But
yeah, okay, great, thank you. So let me ask a supplemental question to all three of you. It's this.
Is that fun now?
Let's let's say we're sitting here in I don't know 3-4 years time from now, right? And we're looking back and we're seeing, did Europe actually support development of green energy, whether it's electricity or green hydrogen production in North Africa? Did it actually provide support, or was it all talk again? What do you think? I'm asking you to gaze into your crystal ball and forecast this. What do you think is the probability that this time Europe will actually do something concrete about what it says it's going to do. So let me ask Frank first, Barbara second, and then Sylvia.
Well, I mean, I think it's a very, very good question because, I mean, even in the leaked, hydrogen strategy, there is mention of import and investments into neighboring countries, etc. But it lacks definition. So then the question is, okay, what's going to happen? So I guess that's why you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
There's two things. I mean, this commission. When it started in December, they said we have three priorities: digital, green, and immigration. Now, with this, we're actually tackling at least two, and I think that should be, it should be an additional driver to economic development, both for Europe as well as the neighboring regions. Then the other thing is that, I mean, we're talking about the European Commission, but there is also 27 member states. And, the thing that Germany is saying we have 9 billion, 2 billion goes, and they've immediately signed an MOU with Morocco. I think that also could be an additional impetus for Brussels to basically follow if they're not leading.
Okay, so if I can summarize, you are optimistic in your answer to my question, but maybe cautiously optimistic, but optimistic. Okay, yes. Badr, what do you think?
I have to say that I agree with Frank. I am optimistic. This is why when I started to present, I told you and I explained a little bit about the Desertec initiative at the beginning. And I have then to say that we had some countries like Germany, we worked as well then with France to be able to start the first project and then to export then green electricity. And the idea was really to be able to implement it. But we had some problems regarding as well the interconnections. We were connected to the electricity grid. And I think now this is a little bit then different because this topic of Power to X will give us then more opportunities. We spoke about then more ways, more partners. This is one point. The other point, when we started 10 years ago with the first CSP power plant, of course, it was expensive. And then I have to say that we noticed and we saw since more than 5 years, the real decrease of the cost of renewable energy. Mm. This is slowly not only a solution which might be then addressed, but this is clearly a viable option which might be as well then developed. And this is why I think now slowly, even if it's not directly, and then even if we see a strong interest from the European Commission, but I think as well with the bilateral cooperation, we will be able then to start, and I'm really optimistic.
Okay, so two answers basically: optimistic that this time you will get it right. Okay, Sylvia, do you share that optimism?
I have to answer with one word. I think actually there were two parts to your question. One, in general, will Europe this time do something? And taking the second part, I think this kind of thing works when there is reciprocity and a balanced approach. So I think basically you say, will Europe do whatever is required? I would say the other countries also have to do their share, including, doing some reforms at home. You just look at the way it's going on in the Western Balkans, the process of convergence with Europe. And as I said earlier, if you want those markets to work, they have to be able to talk to each other. So that you need some effort from the countries of the Southern Shores as well, not just from the EU. That's what I mean. And I think it has to be balanced. The other thing is 5 years is nothing in time. And I think I said it before, it takes time and you have to be patient and deterministic. We started the process of the single market in energy in 1985. the first white paper or green paper. I don't remember what is a white or a green. I remember because that's when I started working. Well, they have green paper and white paper, and sometimes they become green and white. I don't care. What I'm saying is the first paper on the single energy market, 1987, sorry, not 1985, was the single market. So, and we say we still don't have a single market for the 27. So it just has to be stepwise, and you have to be patient, and everybody has to be the bonne volonté, the goodwill of making it happen. And I think it will be, but I'm an optimistic, and I think we're talking about 2050 here, huh, really. You need to start working now on 2050. I don't think in 3 or 4 years time or 5 years, what you said, we'll have a definite decision on that. I think it will still be in the making.
Okay.
Excuse me, Jonathan, if you allow me, I would like to ask you, because we had then this cooperation regarding the first big CSP power plants, and we started then 10 years ago. And you supported this project because you, and as well then Sylvia, were working then for the World Bank. What was your position 10 years ago? What was your appreciation 10 years ago about the...
That's an excellent question. So 10 years ago, I was more optimistic about the opening of Europe than with hindsight I should have been. Things did not progress as much as I hoped and expected. But if you ask me now, am I optimistic for the future, for the reasons that you've all said and that I contributed to at the beginning of the webinar, I think the circumstances are now more favorable than they were 10 years ago. Partly because renewables are incomparably cheaper now than they were 10 years ago, but mainly I think because Europe shows more, frankly, more seriousness now about its own green transformation and how important that is to Europe economically, not only for environmental or climate change reasons, but economically important to them. And that has intensified because of the COVID-19 pandemic, because we're now in an economic depression that we will have to find a way out of. And because I think in the last 10 years or however many years, Europe has seen something of the consequences of economic difficulties and instability in some of the countries from the southern side of the Mediterranean, and that has economic and political and social consequences in Europe. So I think one has to have some faith in the human ability to learn from big mistakes and not repeat them. Maybe I'm too optimistic when I put it on that level, but I have some faith in that. So I would say I'm more realistically optimistic than I was 10 years ago. Let me put it like that. I think at this point we've spent a lot of time. We probably could carry on talking about this for hours. I see more questions still coming into the Q&A box, but I think at this point I need to thank everybody very much, our speakers and our participants, and hand this back to David to close our webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan, and to all of you, our distinguished panelists. This has been an outstanding conversation. I have personally really enjoyed listening to you all. No doubt this is a hot topic in our energy industries right now. There's going to be many more webinars and obviously sessions coming out on the topic when we get to see each other face to face. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for your passion to the energy industries. We welcome you to check out IAEE at www.iaee.org. Advanced wishes to all of you for the coming weekend, and I officially close this webinar. Thank you.